Every spring, you walk into the same garden center and you see the same plants, the same coneflowers, the same black-eyed Susans, the same daylilies in the same 6 colors that everybody else's yard already has. And every fall, you watch most of those plants finish blooming by August and stand there looking tired for the next 2 months while you wait for a frost that takes too long to arrive. There is a reason most American front yards look essentially identical in July. Most American gardeners shop from the same 50 plants, and most of those 50 plants have a 6 to 8 week bloom window before they quit. Plant breeders and serious gardeners on 3 continents have known about a separate, quieter list of perennials for the last 100 years. Plants that bloom from late spring straight through the first hard frost in October or November. Plants that look ordinary in the catalog photograph and then become the single most photographed thing in your yard once they actually flower. Plants you have probably never seen at a big box garden center because the big box garden center cannot make money on a plant that does not need replacing every 2 seasons. 11 of them, every single one a true perennial, every single one with a documented bloom window of 4 to 6 months or longer. Every single one available if you know exactly what to ask for at a real plant nursery near you. Plant them once, they come back. They bloom and bloom and bloom and refuse to stop until the cold genuinely shuts them down for the year. By the time we get to plant number 7, you are going to understand why most of what you have been planting was the wrong choice all along. The good news is, it is correctable this season. Let's get into it. Plant 1, Gaura. The full common name is whirling butterflies, and once you have seen this plant in a summer breeze, you will understand the name completely. The flowers do not sit still, they float. Hundreds of small 4-petaled blooms dancing on long, thin, wiry stems that bend and sway with every air current, creating the visual illusion of a cloud of pale pink and white butterflies hovering 18 inches above the foliage. There is essentially no other plant in American gardening that creates that specific effect, and once you grow it, every garden without it looks slightly emptier. Gaura Linda Mary is hardy in USDA zones 5 through 9. Whirling butterflies is the most reliable cultivar, with white blooms aging to soft pink. Siskiyou pink produces deeper pink blooms throughout. Both cultivars bloom continuously from late May or early June all the way through October. That is 5 full months of nonstop flowering from a plant that requires almost no attention from you in return. Here is the part that defines this plant. Gaura is genuinely deep-rooted. The taproot drives down 24 to 36 inches into the soil during the plant's first season, accessing moisture and minerals that surface-rooted plants cannot reach. That deep root structure is exactly why Gaura tolerates drought better than nearly any other long bloomer on this list. Once established, it asks for almost no supplemental water through even brutal American summers. And here is the additional benefit most gardening videos miss. The flowers are biologically engineered for long-tongued pollinators. Skippers, butterflies, certain solitary native bees, and the occasional hummingbird all visit Gaura constantly. While your neighbors are watching empty bee feeders, you are watching a continuous insect circus that runs from June through October in your own yard. The plant is genuinely productive habitat, not just decoration. Plant Gaura in full sun in lean, well-drained soil. Avoid rich amended soil, which makes the plant floppy and short-lived. Lean, dry soil produces a more compact, upright form and triples the bloom output. After the first hard frost, cut the entire plant back to 4 inches above the ground. Next May, it returns slightly larger and slightly more dramatic than the previous year. Plant 2, Knautia macedonica. There are plants that announce themselves with enormous showy flowers, and there are plants that work quietly across the entire season, producing wave after wave of small flowers that genuinely add up. Knautia is the second kind, and it is one of the most underrated reliable bloomers in any nursery catalog. Knautia macedonica is hardy in USDA zones 5 through 9. The flowers are small pincush-shaped heads, about an inch across, in a saturated burgundy red color that is genuinely unlike anything else in typical American gardens. Each bloom sits on top of a long, wiry stem that rises about 3 feet above a clean basal rosette of foliage. The plant produces dozens of blooms continuously from late May or early June through October. That is a 4 to 5 month non-stop bloom window from a plant that asks for nothing from you in return except sunlight and average soil. And here is the secret almost no one mentions about Knautia. The burgundy color is precisely the shade that designers reach for when they want to add visual depth and weight to a perennial border. The flowers look almost black against bright green foliage in early morning light, then warm into a glowing wine red as the sun rises and reaches them. There is essentially no other long-blooming perennial that produces this exact color, which is exactly why high-end European garden designers reach for Knautia constantly, and why almost no American gardener has ever heard of it. Knautia self-seeds gently. Volunteer seedlings appear in the soil around the parent plant every spring, producing fully grown new plants by mid-summer. Within 3 years, you have a small colony from a single starter plant, and the seedlings show subtle color variations from the parent that add genuine character to the colony. The plant is, quietly, populating your garden for free while you focus on other things. Plant Knautia in full sun in any well-drained soil. Cut back finished flower stems through the season to keep new blooms coming, though even unpruned plants continue to flower reliably. After hard frost, cut the entire plant back to the basal rosette. Next spring, it returns. The volunteers come up around it, and the colony slowly expands into a sustained burgundy presence that lasts from late May through Halloween. 2 plants in, and I want you to do me one favor in the comments before plant number 3. Tell me the longest blooming plant you have ever grown in your own garden, and tell me how long it actually flowered. Because here is what I have noticed across thousands of gardeners. Most of us drastically overestimate how long our favorite plants actually bloom, and that overestimation is exactly why we end up with August gaps in our gardens every single year. Drop your honest answer below. I read every comment, and your answer helps me understand what the actual baseline looks like for most American yards. Plant 3, Centranthus rubor, commonly called Jupiter's beard or red valerian. This is a plant you have almost certainly seen growing wild somewhere in the United States. It naturalizes along old stone walls in New England. It grows out of crumbling concrete in San Francisco. It blooms in cliff crevices along the California coast. It performs in conditions that would kill almost every other ornamental perennial in your yard, and it does it for 5 straight months without complaint. Centranthus rubor is hardy in USDA zones 4 through 9. The flowers are dense terminal clusters of small star-shaped blooms in a deep coral red, soft pink, or pure white, depending on the cultivar. Each cluster sits on top of a stem about 30 inches tall, rising above clean blue-green succulent-looking foliage. The plant blooms continuously from May through October, with the heaviest flush in late spring and another strong wave in early autumn after a brief midsummer slowdown. And here is the genuinely surprising fact about this plant. It grows in conditions that no rational gardener would consider suitable for any ornamental. Cracks in stone walls, the rubble at the edge of a driveway, old gravel paths, pure rocky scree that would defeat any other perennial in this video. The reason is that the root system specifically evolved to grow downward through tight crevices in pursuit of moisture. The plant does not just tolerate poor sites, it prefers them. Rich garden soil makes Centranthus floppy and short-lived. Bad soil makes it perform indefinitely. Centranthus self-seeds aggressively. The papery seeds drift on the wind to find new cracks and crevices, often establishing themselves several feet from the parent plant. This is exactly why some sources warn about this plant. They are not wrong, but they are missing the point. If you want a long-blooming perennial that genuinely thrives on neglect and gradually establishes itself across hard surfaces you cannot otherwise plant, this is the exact plant you want. Site selection matters. Choose accordingly. Plant in full sun in lean, dry soil. The leaner and drier, the better. The cultivar albus produces pure white flowers and is the most often grown white form in good nurseries. The standard red form is widely available under the name coccineus. Deadhead the spent clusters once in midsummer to push a stronger fall flush. After hard frost, cut the entire plant back to 4 inches. Next May, it returns and you have another 5 months of color from a plant that asks nothing of you. Plant 4, Verbena bonariensis. This is a plant you have almost certainly walked past in a public botanical garden and not realized you were looking at it. Tall, slender, wiry stems rising 5 to 6 feet above the surrounding plants, topped with small clusters of vivid lavender-purple flowers. The whole structure so airy and see-through that you can Plant it in front of other plants in a border, without blocking the view. It is what English garden designers call a transparent plant, and it is one of the most useful and most underappreciated long bloomers available. Verbena bonariensis is hardy in USDA zones 7 through 11, though gardeners in zones 5 and 6 often grow it as a reliable self-seeding annual that returns every year from its own seeds. The flowers appear from June through the first hard frost in October or November, depending on your zone. 5 to 6 full months of bloom from a single plant. There is almost nothing else with that bloom duration on the American market, and here is the part that genuinely elevates this plant. It is one of the most powerful butterfly magnets ever documented in horticultural research. Monarchs, swallowtails, painted ladies, fritillaries, skippers, and at least 11 other butterfly species visit Verbena bonariensis at significantly higher rates than they visit Buddleja butterfly. Bush, the plant traditionally marketed as the ultimate butterfly attractor. A mature stand of Verbena bonariensis in August is genuinely covered in butterflies, sometimes 10 or 15 at a time on a single plant, and that level of activity is something most American gardeners have never personally witnessed in their own yards. It self-seeds reliably, sometimes aggressively. The seedlings appear in cracks of patios, edges of garden beds, in gravel paths, and in the soil immediately around the parent plant. Volunteers can be transplanted easily in their first year, or simply allowed to fill in wherever they choose. After 3 or 4 seasons, you have a self-sustaining colony. Plant in full sun in average soil. Despite the tall height, the airy structure means it almost never needs staking. Place it toward the middle or back of borders, but do not be afraid to plant it in front of shorter plants. The transparency genuinely works as designers describe. After hard frost, cut back to 4 inches. Some plants survive the winter and resprout in spring. Others die and are replaced by their own seedlings. Either way, the colony persists. Plant 5, Calamintha nepeta white cloud. There is one specific moment every August when most American perennial gardens enter a quiet period. The summer blooming workhorses are tired. The fall bloomers have not started yet. Most gardens look slightly worn through the worst weeks of late summer. Calamintha does not care about August. Calamintha simply continues, producing thousands of tiny white flowers across a soft cloud-like mound, exactly when everything else has slowed down. Calamintha nepeta is hardy in USDA zones 5 through 9. White cloud is the cultivar specifically selected for the densest bloom production and the cleanest white color. The flowers are tiny, individually almost invisible, but the plant produces them by the thousands simultaneously, creating an overall effect that resembles a low foamy cloud of white about 18 inches tall and 24 inches wide. Bloom period runs from June through October. 5 months of non-stop flower production from a single small plant. Here is what makes Calamintha genuinely exceptional and almost completely unknown to most American gardeners. The flower count is, by some published estimates, among the highest of any perennial of comparable size. A mature white cloud in peak August bloom can hold over 20,000 individual open flowers simultaneously, which is exactly why pollinators absolutely cover this plant from morning until evening, through the entire bloom window. Native bees and small specialist pollinators in particular treat Calamintha as a primary nectar source from June through October. The foliage is also a feature, not just a holder for the flowers. Aromatic, finely textured, mint green, and it releases a soft lemon mint scent when brushed against. Plant Calamintha along a pathway edge where you will walk past it regularly, and every walk through your garden becomes a small sensory event for the entire summer. Plant in full sun in average, well-drained soil. Calamintha is one of the few plants that benefits genuinely from a midsummer shearing. Cut the entire plant back by 1/3 in early July, just as the first heavy flush is winding down. Within 2 weeks, it returns with even more flowers and continues solidly through October. After hard frost, cut back to 3 inches. Next May, it returns slightly larger and slightly more abundant than the year before. 5 plants in, and I want to acknowledge something. If you are still here, you are not casually browsing perennial videos to fill background noise. You are seriously thinking about your yard for next year. Subscribe to this channel right now before plant number 6. The gardeners who subscribe in the middle of a video are the ones whose yards genuinely transform within 1 season. The button is right below the video. It costs you nothing and tells me to keep making this kind of content. Plant 6. Erysimum bulls Mauve. This plant is, by a meaningful margin, the longest blooming hardy perennial commonly available in any English-speaking country. Properly sited and properly maintained, it can produce flowers 10 months out of 12. In mild climates, it can technically bloom for the entire year, with only the briefest pause during peak summer heat or peak winter cold. There is essentially no other perennial with that kind of bloom record. Erysimum bulls Mauve is hardy in USDA zones 6 through 9. The flowers are clusters of small 4-petaled mauve-purple blooms held on upright stems above tight evergreen blue-green foliage. The plant grows about 2 feet tall and 2 feet wide, with a slightly woody base that gives it structure year-round. Bloom typically begins in March in mild zones, continues through summer, fall, and into early winter in protected sites. In Zone 7 and warmer, gardeners regularly photograph this plant in bloom in December and January. And here is the specific fact that explains the unique bloom record. Bulls Mauve is genetically sterile. It produces no viable seeds. Every flower it forms simply makes way for the next flower, instead of going through the energy-intensive process of seed production. The plant is biologically committed to flowering as essentially its only function. That single genetic feature is what gives you nearly continuous color from March through December across most of the southern half of the United States. The trade-off, and there is always a trade-off, is that Bulls Mauve is slightly shorter-lived than most other perennials on this list. The intense flowering effort burns the plant out faster, with most plants performing reliably for 3 to 5 years before declining. The simple solution is cuttings. Snip a 4-inch section of any non-flowering stem, dip in rooting hormone, push into seed-starting mix, and within 6 weeks you have a fully rooted new plant ready to replace the parent. One mother plant supplies you with replacements indefinitely. That is the actual maintenance strategy, and it takes about 15 minutes once a year. Plant Bulls Mauve in full sun in lean, well-drained soil. Like several plants on this list, it actively resents rich amended soil. Lean, dry conditions produce a longer-lived, harder-blooming plant. After bloom slows in deep winter, shear lightly to maintain a tight habit. The plant rewards the lean conditions and minimal pruning, with nearly a decade of continuous color from your initial planting, plus a few easy cuttings. Plant 7, Persicaria Firetail. This is the one I told you would change everything. Pay close attention. Persicaria is a genus that almost no American gardener knows, and the cultivar firetail specifically is one of the most quietly impressive long-blooming perennials introduced to North American gardens in the last 40 years. Imagine a dense mounding clump of clean, dark green foliage about 3 feet tall, sending up hundreds of slender vertical flower spikes covered in tiny, deep cherry-red florets that look exactly like miniature bottle brushes pointing toward the sky. Now imagine that display continuing non-stop from July through the first hard frost in October or November. That is exactly what Persicaria Firetail delivers. Persicaria is hardy in USDA zones 4 through 8. Firetail is the most popular cultivar and produces the deepest, most saturated red coloration. Taurus is another excellent choice. Both perform reliably with essentially no maintenance. The plant grows 3 to 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide, forming a dense clump that holds its shape through the entire growing season without staking, without flopping, without intervention. And here is the specific feature that makes Persicaria worth knowing about. It thrives in conditions where almost every other long-blooming plant on this list struggles. Moist, heavy, clay-leaning soil, part shade, areas under high tree canopies that get morning sun and afternoon shade, locations near downspouts where the soil stays consistently wet. These are the parts of your yard where most perennials disappoint you, and Persicaria treats those exact conditions as ideal. If you have a wet, shady spot that you have been giving up on for years, this is the plant that finally solves it. Pollinators absolutely cover Persicaria during peak bloom. The tubular florets are perfect feeding tubes for bumblebees, which work the plant from morning until evening through July, August, September, and October. A mature stand of firetail in September is one of the most quietly buzzing places in any garden, and the sound itself is part of why this plant is treasured by gardeners who know about it. Persicaria spreads through underground rhizomes at a moderate, manageable pace. One starter plant becomes a substantial clump by year 3. Every 4 to 5 years, lift and divide the clump in early spring to produce 6 to 8 free new plants. Plant in part shade to full sun in moisture-retentive soil amended with compost. After the first hard frost, cut the entire plant back to 4 inches. Next year, it returns ironclad and continues to bloom from July through October without ever asking for anything from you. Tell me honestly in the comments, of the 7 plants we have covered so far, how many had you ever heard of before today? I am genuinely curious whether even one of these has been in your local nursery rotation, because the entire reason for this video is that most American gardeners have never been introduced to plants like these. Drop a number below. The honest answer helps me understand exactly how rare these plants are in your specific region. Plant 8. Geum totally Tangerine. There is a specific color of orange that almost nobody plants in their garden, an orange that is more peach than fire, more apricot than pumpkin. It is one of the most underused colors in residential American gardening, and Geum totally Tangerine produces it in continuous waves from April through October across most of its range. 6 straight months of soft glowing peach-orange flowers from a plant that almost no big box garden center will stock. Geum hybrids are hardy in USDA zones 5 through 9. Totally Tangerine specifically is a sterile cultivar, similar to Bolzan's Mauve and Geranium Roseanne, which means it cannot set seed and therefore commits all of its energy to continuous flowering. The plant grows about 2 feet tall and 2 feet wide, with rounded scalloped basal foliage that stays clean and presentable through the entire growing season, including the brief midsummer rest period when bloom slows slightly. The flowers are remarkable. 2-inch single blooms with a soft melting apricot peach color, held on long wiry stems that wave above the foliage in any breeze. Each flower lasts only a few days, but the plant produces them constantly, with dozens open at any given moment from late April through October. A mature totally Tangerine in full bloom looks almost like a small floating cloud of soft peach color suspended above its own foliage. And here is the design fact that explains why this plant deserves a spot in your garden. Soft orange and peach is one of the most flattering pairing colors in horticulture. It works with deep purples, with soft pinks, with whites, with blues, with chartreuse foliage, with silver foliage, and with deep burgundy leaves. There is essentially nothing in a perennial border that does not look better with totally Tangerine nearby. That is exactly why high-end English garden designers reach for this plant in nearly every border they design, and why so few American homeowners have ever encountered it. Like Bolz's Mauve, Geum hybrids like totally Tangerine are slightly shorter-lived than typical perennials. Most plants perform reliably for 4 to 6 years before declining. Propagate by division every 3 years. Lift the entire crown in early spring, slice cleanly into 3 or 4 pieces, and replant each piece. Each division grows to full size within a single season. Plant in full sun to part shade in average to rich, well-drained soil. Water consistently during the first season. Cut back finished flower stems through the season to keep new bloom production active. Plant 9, hardy Plumbago. Ceratostigma plumbaginoides is one of the most beautiful underused ground-covering perennials in North American gardening, and it does something that almost no other plant on this list can claim. It produces 2 completely separate spectacular shows in a single growing season. First, 3 months of non-stop intense cobalt blue flowers from July through October. Second, a complete foliage transformation in late autumn, with every leaf turning a saturated burgundy red that holds for an additional 6 to 8 weeks until frost finally takes the plant down. Hardy Plumbago is hardy in USDA zones 5 through 9. The plant grows only 9 to 12 inches tall, spreading slowly through underground stems to form a dense ground-covering mat about 18 inches wide per starter plant. The blooms are unmistakable. True cobalt blue, 5-petaled, about a ½ inch across in small terminal clusters held above the foliage. There are very few perennials that produce a blue this saturated and this true. And here is the most underrated fact about this plant. The blue color is exactly the shade that landscape designers reach for when they want to add visual depth and coolness to a border dominated by warm colors like yellow, orange, red, and pink. A single planting of hardy Plumbago at the base of warm-tone perennials transforms the entire color palette, adding the missing cool note that makes everything else look richer. Designers know this. Big box nurseries do not stock it. Both facts are connected. The fall foliage transformation is the second reason this plant deserves a permanent spot in your garden. Starting in early October, the dark green summer foliage shifts gradually through bronze, then burgundy, then a saturated dark red across the entire ground cover. The blue flowers continue blooming during this color shift, creating one of the most striking color combinations in any American garden. Deep cobalt blue flowers against ruby red foliage. There is nothing else on this list that performs that specific trick. Hardy Plumbago is slow to emerge in spring. New growth often does not appear until mid-May or even early June, which sometimes alarms first-year gardeners who believe the plant has died over winter. Be patient, it returns. Mark the location with a small stake the first fall so you remember exactly where it is the following spring. Plant in full sun to part shade in well-drained soil. Cut back any winter remnants in early spring before new growth emerges. After establishment, it tolerates moderate drought without protest. Plant 10. Coreopsis Moonbeam. This is one of the few plants on this list that you might actually find at a well-stocked garden center, but you will essentially never find the right variety. Most stores carry the standard yellow Coreopsis cultivars. Moonbeam is different. The flowers are a soft butter yellow, almost cream yellow, with a quiet glow that performs the opposite of the saturated bright yellow most yellow flowers deliver. It is subtle, sophisticated, and works as a softening agent in nearly any color scheme. Coreopsis Moonbeam is hardy in USDA zones 4 through 9 and was named Perennial Plant of the Year in 1992. That award is the highest honor in North American perennial horticulture, and the fact that it went to this specific cultivar tells you everything about how reliable, attractive, and adaptable the plant genuinely is. The foliage is fine, thread-like and bright green, growing in a clean mound about 18 inches tall and 2 feet wide. The plant blooms continuously from June through October. 5 full months of soft glowing pale yellow daisies from a plant that essentially never asks for help. And here is the part that makes Moonbeam an essential mixing plant in any perennial border. The pale yellow color is genuinely a connector color. It pairs harmoniously with virtually every other flower color in horticulture without competing. Where deeper yellows clash with pink and disrupt purple, Moonbeam softens both. Where bright orange overwhelms soft mauve, Moonbeam mediates. A single mass planting of Moonbeam threaded through the front of any perennial border instantly unifies whatever color combinations are happening behind it. Garden designers use this plant specifically as a visual harmonizer, and home gardeners almost never know that is what it does. Moonbeam spreads slowly through underground stems, forming a clean, expanding clump rather than running aggressively. Every 4 years, divide the crown in early spring to produce 4 to 6 free new plants. Plant in full sun in average well-drained soil. After the first major bloom flush, shear the plant back by 1/3 in mid-July to encourage a strong second flush through August and September. After hard frost, cut back to 3 inches. Next May, it returns and the cycle repeats reliably for the next 15 to 20 years. 10 plants in, and I want to ask you one specific question before plant number 11. Which of these 10 have you decided you are going to find and plant this season? Because the truth is, the gardeners who finish this video without making at least one specific commitment are the ones whose yards look the same next year as they do today. The gardeners who pick at least one and write it down right now are the ones whose yards genuinely change. Drop the name below. Tell me your state or zone. Make the commitment. Plant 11, Tricyrtis. The common name is toad lily, which is one of the worst plant common names in all of horticulture, and probably the single biggest reason this plant is so rarely encountered in American gardens. Set the name aside and look at what it actually does. From September through November, when the rest of your shade garden has long given up, toad lily produces some of the most exquisitely detailed flowers in all of perennial horticulture. Orchid-like blooms in white or pale lavender, intensely speckled with purple spots, holding open along arching 3-foot stems for the entire fall season. Tricyrtis hirta and the related species and hybrids are hardy in USDA zones 4 through 9. The plant grows in a clean, upright clump of glossy, dark green oval foliage with elegant arching stems. Flowers appear in late summer or early fall depending on the variety, with peak bloom typically in late September and October. In zones 7 and warmer, The plant continues to push new blooms into mid-November, providing genuinely the last reliable bloom event in a shade garden before winter arrives. And here is what makes toad lily so genuinely valuable that any serious shade gardener eventually finds and plants it. Almost every other shade-blooming perennial in North American gardening blooms in spring. Bleeding heart, hellebores, brunera, Solomon's seal, woodland phlox, columbines, all of them spring bloomers. By July, most shade gardens are essentially finished with flowers and rely entirely on foliage for the rest of the year. Tricyrtis breaks that pattern completely, providing genuine flower presence in the shade garden in October, when nothing else of any meaningful color is blooming there. The flowers themselves reward close examination in a way few perennials do. Each bloom is small, only about an inch across, but the petal patterning is genuinely intricate. White or pale lavender background, dense purple speckling, a small structural cluster of yellow and purple at the center. They look almost like miniature orchids, and walking through a planting of mature toad lily in October feels like discovering a quiet exotic garden hidden in your own yard. Tricyrtis spreads slowly through underground rhizomes, forming a dense, clean clump that doubles in footprint every 3 to 4 seasons. Plant in part shade to full shade in moist, humus-rich soil amended with compost. Water consistently through the establishment season. After hard frost, cut the entire plant back to 2 inches. The following spring, the plant emerges quietly, builds its foliage through the summer, and delivers its quiet October show again. And every fall, when you walk into your shaded back garden on a cool morning in October and see the toad lilies in full intricate bloom while everything around them is finishing for the year, that is, the moment this entire 11-plant list pays off completely. Now here is the question that matters most. If these plants are this good, why have most American gardeners never heard of them? The answer is genuinely simple and worth understanding. Big box garden centers and grocery store seasonal plant sections operate on a business model built around fast inventory turnover and predictable consumer recognition. They sell the same 50 plants every spring because those plants move quickly, customers recognize the names, and the supply chain is enormous and efficient. There is no profit margin in introducing customers to plants they have never heard of, plants that require slightly more sophisticated growing conditions, or plants that perform so well over a long lifetime that they never need replacing. The plants in this video exist in a different supply chain entirely. Specialty nurseries, mail-order perennial catalogs from established growers, local independent garden centers run by serious gardeners, plant society sales held annually in most major metropolitan areas, online nurseries that specialize in cottage garden, English style, and naturalistic perennials. That is where you find these plants, and finding them takes slightly more effort than walking into a big box store. But the effort is one time. Plant them once, and they bloom for years and years and years. Most of the work of having an exceptional perennial garden is not in the maintenance. It is in the sourcing. Once these plants are in your soil, they outperform almost every common alternative on the market by a factor of 3 or 4 in bloom duration alone. 3 rules separate gardeners who succeed with these rare long bloomers from gardeners who lose them in the first season. Almost no gardening content covers all 3. Rule 1. Plant in lean soil, not rich soil. Most American gardening advice tells you to dig a generous hole, amend with compost and fertilizer, and provide your new perennial with the richest possible growing conditions. For nearly every plant on this list, that advice is exactly wrong. Long-blooming perennials evolved in lean, often gravelly, drought-tested soils across Europe, the Mediterranean, and the Asian steppes. Rich amended American garden soil makes them weak, floppy, mildew-prone, and short-lived. Plant them in plain ordinary soil, amend with sand or fine gravel if you have heavy clay, and provide no fertilizer at all. They thrive on neglect. Rule 2. Deadhead during the bloom season, not at the end. Most gardeners wait until late fall to clean up spent flower stems. For the plants on this list specifically, mid-season deadheading is the single most effective intervention you can perform. Cut back finished flower stems through the entire bloom window every 2 to 3 weeks, and you maintain peak flower production from June through October. Skip the deadheading and the plant slows down by August. 5 minutes of light pruning every other weekend doubles your bloom output for the entire season. Rule 3. Track your sources. The single biggest mistake gardeners make with rare perennials is buying once, losing the plant for any reason, and being unable to find it again because they did not record where it came from. When you buy any of the plants on this list, write down the nursery name, the cultivar name, and the date of purchase. Keep that list in one place. 3 years from now, when you want to add more of the same plants or replace one that declined, you will not have to start the search over from scratch. That single 30-second habit protects every investment you make in your garden going forward. You just spent 35 minutes learning 11 plants that turn an ordinary American yard into one of the most photographed gardens on your street, with flower color from late April through November, almost no maintenance, and a level of plant sophistication that most of your neighbors will never even know how to identify. That is not just a video. That is a real specific, sourceable plan for a perennial border that genuinely outperforms the common alternative. If even one plant on this list is going into your soil this season, subscribe to this channel right now. Because next week we go just as deep on a different list, and the week after that, and the week after that. Real plant knowledge, real cultivar guidance, real information that you cannot find at any big box garden center in America. You do not want to be the gardener who finds this channel 6 months from now, looks at this video, and wishes you had subscribed today. The gardeners who subscribed at the beginning are already ahead. Drop one comment below before you go. Tell me which plant from this list you are going to track down first, and tell me what state or zone you are gardening in. I read every single comment, and your answer directly shapes what I cover next. This is your yard. This is your year to break out of the ordinary. Go find these plants.